Okay, welcome everyone to the first meeting of 2026. This is an exciting one for many reasons. Um, Number one reason is we're back in person, so that's the most exciting thing of all. But overall, this is also my handing over the presidentship over to Becca. So, having served as president for the past 9.5 years or so, this is exciting to now hand it off to some new leadership, doing some new things and exciting things with the club. So, I couldn't be more excited for the future of the club and what we're going to be doing. While I may be leaving as president, there's no way I'm going anywhere. I am sticking around for sure. So with that, let's welcome Madam President.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and thank you for all your years of dedication to the club. So yeah, welcome to our back in person meeting here, and we're going to be hosting them at Backscatter. And so super stoked to have you guys here in the flesh. And I thought it'd be really fun to kind of celebrate bringing it back to in person by bringing it way back to film. And so we have an amazing panel of folks here. Who I am a huge fan of all of these people, and I hope that you guys know how special it is to have all of them in the same room. It's just really, really cool to get to spend time with all these folks. I'm very excited. So I'm Becca. I'm the operations manager here at Backscatter. I also want to take a brief minute to introduce you to some other new board members. Where's Suzanne? Suzanne is the new vice president. So Suzanne also is the president of the Breakwater Collective next door. As many of you, I think, were at the opening, and several of you have images in there as well. And then a couple of new members at large. We have James Emery controlling everything over here. And Jim Decker back there. So we're all super excited to be here, and thank you all for being here. And then also Patrick Webster, who could not be here tonight, is also a new member at large and will be here in the future as well. So stick around after the talk this evening. We are going to talk about the 2025 Photographer of the Year. We're going to vote on the Photo of the Year. We're going to talk about our monthly mini competitions for next year and some changes there to the rules that we are going to be making some fun changes. It's all good. So stick around after boards, especially if you're a member or interested in becoming a member. But tonight, we are going to be talking about shooting film. And everybody here has a really unique kind of method and perspective. And a lot of NCUPS members began their journeys shooting film. And many still have their rigs maybe collecting dust on a shelf somewhere or in a closet. And some might still be using it, but these fine folks are keeping it very much alive, and that's pretty amazing. If you would please hold questions until the end. And if you're joining us on Zoom, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll ask them to these folks at the end as well. So I'm going to take a quick sec to just intro everybody and then let them kind of talk about their images. So starting with Chuck Davis. Chuck is a cinematographer and photographer and director of photography specializing in underwater imaging. For over 40 years, Chuck has filmed in worldwide locations, including Arctic Alaska, Greenland, Antarctica, and the Amazon. As a resident of Pacific Grove, California, Davis has spent many years imaging the spectacular undersea realms of Monterey Bay, Carmel Bay, and Big Sur. His filming credits encompass several IMAX productions, including 2 Academy Award-nominated films, Alaska, Spirit of the Wild, and The Living Sea. He's worked on numerous expeditions with the Cousteau's filming filming aboard vessels with the late Jacques Cousteau and his son Jean Michael on the rediscovery of the World TV series, and Jean-Michel Cousteau's award-winning Ocean Adventures PBS series. Davis's still photography have been widely published and are included in numerous corporate, private, and museum collections. In 2017, Davis was awarded the prestigious Nogi Award for the Arts by the Academy of the Underwater Arts and Sciences. And then we have Joe Platko. Yes, please clap. Joe Platko is a nature and underwater photographer who currently resides in Monterey, California. He's a graduate of CSU Monterey Bay, having earned a bachelor's of science focusing on marine ecosystems. It was there that he furthered his passion for the ocean by first obtaining his dive certification and shortly thereafter buying his first underwater camera setup. Joe has been published in the New York Times, BBC, Huffington Post, British Airways High Life magazine, Virgin, The Outbound Collective. His work has also been used by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, BBC's Blue Planet 2, Pelican Flashlights, Amuini Beach Resorts and Spa, and Celaya Beach House. Joe is an ambassador for Ryuijie Outdoors, has placed in numerous contests, including the NCUPS Monterey Shootout, woo, and NC International Photo Competition. Joe works at Bradley Photographic as a print lab assistant and instructor for workshops. In his free time, Joe can be found exploring the wilderness around the Central Coast and telling bad puns. And Robin Robinson. Robin Robinson is a Carmel, California artist who is curious about the way we see and experience the planet and ourselves. Photographing in and around and on the water for over 38 years, she explores the Earth's origins, our connections to the ocean, and our physical and spiritual presence. After an engineering career, Robin completed photography studies at Foothill College and San Francisco City College. She studied and worked with generous West Coast black and white film photography mentors for over 25 years. She continues this tradition in her Sand City darkroom and now uses experimental darkroom processes while honoring the local F64 spirit. Robinson shows her work in community venues and art galleries internationally, in corporate spaces, private collections, and museums. She's received top awards in photographic competitions, and her work is in the permanent collection of Monterey Museum of Art, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, probably butchered that, and the Mariners Museum in Virginia, among others. And Ryuijie was born in Otaro, Japan, and has enjoyed a 50-year successful career in photography. He's had numerous solo and group expositions, and his work resides in both private and public collections, such as the J. Paul Getty Museum in LA and the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson. Ryuijie's images have been featured in many publications, including Camera and Darkroom, View Camera, Black and White Magazine, Lenswork, and Rangefinder. 2 monographs of his work have been published photographs, Ryuijie 1990 and Ryuijie Time and Place 1998. Those exhibits consisted of platinum prints, a 19th century process that requires hand coating the emulsion on fine watercolor paper, and larger digitally captured and printed works. He'll talk more about that. He made his first underwater photograph in 1971 during military service on Guam and became serious about photography as an art form a few years later, and in the practice to evolve into a lifelong passion. Effie Benjamin. Effie is a freediver and freelance photographer based between Monterey Bay and Montana. She often shoots on film using a collection of vintage cameras, including the iconic Rolly Marine. Effie's work blends her passion for freediving with the timeless craft of analog photography, capturing the ocean in a way that is both intimate and evocative. Her approach brings beauty that moves people, inspiring curiosity and connection with her subjects. She also has images featured next door at the Breakwater Collective. So what I'd like to do now is show some images that everyone provided and let you guys talk a little bit about the images and your processes. And if you all would just think of questions, we'll open it up for questions at the end.
Hi, guys. Okay, so I submitted only color work, which is a little different. I do a lot of black and white photography too, but I wanted to focus on color here because I know that the rest of these guys are going to cover like masterful black and white photos. So the first couple that we have here, I just want to show like film can be really heartbreaking. These were actually roles that I didn't know that I shot twice. So I have like a little point and shoot film camera where it leaves the leader out when I finish a roll of film. So I had a really beautiful drive to Montana and I like photographed some bulleted cars and things like that. And then I had maybe the best dive of my life at Malpaso with Joe. And like, oh, the bull kelp was so beautiful that day. And then I got my color film developed and it was a little heartbreaking, but sometimes you can find a couple that like work and it's fun. And I don't know, those are like surprises with film photography. So this was photographed, or that was Catalina like diving and then like a tree at Monastery because I just needed to like burn one more shot. So yeah, that's film. And then another fun part of film is just like picking different film stocks. So this is not like edited with like Photoshop or anything for the colors. It's just a film stock called Lomachrome and it makes greens and yellows purple. So I was like, hey, how would that work on kelp? And it works really, really well. It looks super fun and kind of like gives it that like, I don't know, mysterious feel that you get in the ocean. And then these are just examples of like my preferred film stock shooting here in Monterey. I'm usually shooting Portra 800 for color. We need that speed, you know, and if I'm shooting Portra 800, I can usually be at like f5.6 to f8. And that's kind of what I need to like get, it's like you're like range focusing with these. So like that gives me like 3 feet to infinity if I can like stay between like 5, 6, and 11. So yeah, with Portra 800, I can get away with like those settings and maybe like 1/125th of a shutter speed to 1/250th, which I need because if I'm free diving, like that's even harder to like hold yourself still, especially close to the surface with the buoyancy and everything. But it works really well in the kelp forest too, Portra 800. So I think the next couple, yeah, are also examples of it. These were the Melodies, and then yeah, just out at Breakwater. I think last week I asked Bay Photo to develop quickly for me, and they were able. Yeah, it's a little scanning color film is a little tricky. I think you get like a lot more like latitude and like forgiveness with black and white film. Sometimes the color film close to the surface like does crazy stuff with the light reflections, and I'm like, oh, I wasn't planning on that. But again, it just like gives it it gives it like the dreamy feel that I have when I'm free diving, which is why I really like shooting film. And then, yeah, again, with like Portra 800, you know how fast these guys are moving. So shooting like a film stock that like lets me like close my aperture down and hope that they're going to be in the spot that I'm focusing on and everything is pretty important. And then this is like a work in progress. These were shot on my rolling marine, which I have like a love-hate relationship with. It's a medium format film camera. It is so incredibly difficult to use, and it's like really hard to shoot free diving, especially because it's like a 75 millimeter focal length, which on medium format is like like a 50, right, or something like close underwater, which you know is like very long and tight. I think the minimum focusing distance is 3 feet. It's just like really tricky to use, but I see the potential with it, which is that I really love the fall off that I'm getting in the back, like that, like depth of field and stuff. That's like something that I don't get with my wide angle lenses when I'm like at f11, f16. There are close focus filters out there. If anyone has some that they want to let me use, I would really appreciate that because that would let me get closer. That let me get closer to my subject. And I think that a medium format negative would like just, you know, do really well with our film. And then this is when I like loved also, this was like maybe my favorite shot with the Rolling Marine. And I was like, I didn't need to be underwater to take that. But yeah, I just like I love the depth of field that you get with it. And then I think the next one that it also like just looks like a cool prop. So like for Joe and Ryuijie and Chuck, like sometimes I take it out and I'm like, I might not get a photo, but I know that they'll get a cool photo like of the Rolling Marine. It just like looks so cool. And Joe took this on his Nikonos. So I was like, this has to be the like only recent photo of a rolling marine underwater shot on film with a Nikonos. So yeah, pretty cool. But that's it. Chef, you want to cheers?
Sure.
Right.
Do I have to push the button on this, or is it? It's hot. Hello. Okay, this is the images that I put together here are a combination of medium format and then 35 millimeter shot on T-Max, Kodak T-Max 400 that I like to push. Use it 800. Sometimes I'll push it to 1600, 3200. One film stock, I find I can just travel with one film stock and it does everything I need to do. And I kind of like texture of black and white film. I'm not, I should premise my talk because I'm not anti-color and I'm not anti-digital. There's fantastic art being done digitally. I mean, really incredible. Look at the stuff that's on the walls here. And in color has incredible power on our psyche. I learned that in film school, set design. Blues and reds can affect our psyche, and they can be a powerful composition element. And when you go in black and white, you don't have that. So a lot of color images, if you strip the color away, they would be a lesser form of themselves. But there's a few types of images. Maybe go to this one here. So, that I find when you strip away the color, it helps. Which attracts me is that it kind of accentuates the light and shape and form of the subject, and it becomes a little less literal. And maybe I sometimes think of the time element changes too. That's just a personal perception. This is a cormorant that I shot right out here actually when the fledglings were learning how to hunt, and they were some of you have probably dived with these guys. They'll come down and chew on your fingers and they'll look inside. They're attracted to shiny objects. And this one was really, really curious about my camera and followed me around as a storm was approaching over the bay. Let me go to the next one. I was in October. I was down in Mexico covering the sardine migration there off Mag Bay. And in the morning, I had this one morning, very early before the sun was really that high. I was breathing up. It was all free dive, breathing up on the surface. And I was just staring down, breathing up. It's kind of, those of you who are free divers, you're kind of doing this circular breathing. It's kind of yoga-like, and you kind of get in this very relaxed state. And I'm just looking down on the water, and I start to see this ghost image below me. And I sometimes if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We knew there were humpbacks in the area. And all of a sudden, I see this ghost image. It gets closer and closer and closer. And I go, my God, it was a female humpback with its a really large calf that was kind of hugging the mother and crawling over. So they came up and they just hung out with me and stared at me and checked me out. And they didn't even breathe. They just went back down to the deep. It was really early in the morning. Usually down there, when the sun gets up, you get God rays going through the water. But there was a little flatter. And the waves were making different patterns in there, but that was a mother. That particular image is now part of just to plug the Center for Photographic Art. It's part of the Collectors Fine Print program that I made a whole bunch of silver gelatin prints for that this year that were to raise money for the center. If you can go on their site, and we can go to the next frame. This was shot again in my most recent trip in October. That I shot with this housing here. This is I love shooting medium format underwater, and especially when I'm diving from a boat because the housing weighs about 35 pounds on land, but it weighs ounces in the water. And actually, the folks at Backscatter helped me kind of get this set up for freediving. I have syntactic foam underneath the cheese plate under here, so for freediving, it's almost perfectly neutral. But anyway, this is a Contax 645 camera with a custom housing. You couldn't buy a housing for the Contax. For those of you who are familiar with it, they were really big in the 80s and 90s. Fashion photographers were using them, and it kind of convinced Hasselblad to go into the 645 format. But I use this 120 film, and you can get 16 frames on a roll, a whopping 16 frames. But I really enjoy it, and I like when I get in the dark, when you put it in the enlarger, having that extra silver really does make a huge difference. But anyway, these are shot with this particular camera. It's got a 35 millimeter Zeiss Distagon lens, which is, for those of you that have shot an Iconis, it's about the same point of view or field of view as a 15 on an Iconis. That's kind of my workhorse lens, but I have it set up for an 80 as well. And this particular camera, the Contax, has modern electronics because part of it was made in Japan, so it does have the functions for quick. If you need a quick autofocus, you push the button on the back of the housing and it just locks it, and then you take your thumb off and it's manual. And I shoot totally manual on my exposure and whatnot. So these are striped marlin. The picture back there, they were actually, this year this is my third trip to the same area, 23, 24 and 25. And this year, for some reason, the marlin were all over the place, and the water temperature was about 75, 77. And it made a difference because the first year, Ryuijie and I were there together, water was like 83 to 85 degrees or 88 degrees, so it's really warm. And we didn't see many marlin. Saw a lot of mahi-mahi. And then last year, well, the year before last, it was like I guess it was pushing 70 degrees or something, right around in that. It was colder, and we didn't see many marlin. And it was we got some images, but it was kind of a so-so trip. This year, first jump on the water, I looked down, it was like 8 marlin underneath me, when the bubbles cleared, and they were just all over, sailfish, marlins. And then when they feed, it's really interesting. They're really careful. They go around and they're really protective of their bills, because people are telling me, aren't you afraid of getting speared by one when they're feeding? But they protect that bill, and they'll go underneath the bait ball, which is forced up from the deep, and then they kind of go in and they slash, and they'll get one fish and they'll gulp it, and then they'll come out and they'll go around again, as opposed to mahi-mahi when they're there, and it looks like a bunch of piranhas in the Amazon during the low water period. I mean, it's just chaos, Or if you see bonito, this year we saw bonito there, and bonito or skipjack, and it was insane. I mean, just the water gets all murky, and it's just incredible. But I'm gonna go to the next picture. This is a picture I did down in Roca Partida in the Socorro Islands with a Nikonus on a deep ledge. I photographed it every which way but loose, particularly these gray white tip reef sharks. And I was with Ernie Brooks on that trip. We were celebrating his 83rd birthday. If you're familiar with Ernest Brooks, who was my mentor, taught me a lot about black and white. But we both were talking about it's the fins. It's the fins. It's kind of the thing that we're both kind of. And that afternoon, I was able to get down close with shooting almost wide open in the shadows when there's no strobe involved here. And I just got this abstract that these sharks will quiesce during the day, and they're night feeders. So at night they're all over the reef. Sometimes you get bumped by them at night dives, but they're eating fish. But in the day they're kind of quiet on these reef ledges. And Roca Partida is a dive site that I could spend a whole trip just right there. I mean, but some of you may have already been there. But that was shot on 35 millimeter and very shallow depth of field, but it worked for what I was going for. And it was really my personal statement that shark fins belong on living sharks and not in soup. That was kind of my little statement. I've published that quite a few times. I'm going to go to the next image. Joe Platko. All right. Yeah, you got.
All righty. So this is actually one of my most recent works. This was a mirrored print. I actually had tried doing this first off at the Weston Collective, trying to do it in an enlarger printing, and learned really quickly it was too much of a headache. So I was like, I'll just do it digitally. So it is a film shot, and then digitized it and then flipped it and mirrored it. And then this is the negative version of the print itself. And so I know some of you have been out to the gallery I work at. They actually have a show of these right now. So if you're ever curious, I can go into more detail sometime later on. Yeah, it's going to be up for probably sometime through April. But I've had a blast photographing these, because even if it was 2 foot of visibility, it'd be something that you could go out. And these are all typically shot ambient only on the surface, and just kind of allow me to go out and find different ways to look at kelp and enjoy even the worst, most degraded little piece of kelp, and still something, I don't know, kind of lovely about it. And so typically I've been doing a lot of free diving with my photography, but every once in a while I will go out and dive. And typically if I do that, and why I've actually really liked using film is the Nikonos is so small that allows me to put it on a tripod. So for these, I was using orthographic film. So it'd make the reds really dark and then make the blues really light to kind of help the contrast. And then there's no set
bulb on the Nikono. So I would just kind of manually be like, I don't know, approximately 2 seconds, overweight myself and just be sitting down there trying to weight down the tripod with the camera and then just guesstimate and then see how they come out. And so I was very lucky that the leopard shark decided not to move for 2 seconds as everything else was getting churned around in the water. This is out at Otter's Cove. But yeah, it's another kind of series I've been working on of showing movement underneath the kelp. I also really like, kind of what got me into film was I actually started with digital and then went over because I liked that with film. It would cause me to take my time. I'd have to be a lot slower diving around. And typically, you know, like I feel like if I was in digital, I'd be like kicking after stuff or like, ooh, you know, like there's something over there, go kick out and try to get to it really quickly. Versus with film, it was like, no, I want to take my time. And I might even do 3 or 4 drops on a free dive before taking a photograph. And so I felt like, especially with like oftentimes the seals, it's like you're there, you're taking your time, they get more comfortable with you. And then because of that, you're able to get a little bit closer and kind of get more personality out of them. And same thing, this was out at Monastery Beach snorkeling in the shallows. And kind of the same thing of just like, I'm going to let it it was meandering around. And then I was like, oh, wait, it's getting shallower and shallower and shallower. And like, well, at some point, maybe I'll kind of get on the outside of it and it'll get shallow enough that I could get some reflections. And sure enough, and I just remember with the Nikonos was thinking like, okay, like I might only get, 1, maybe 2 shots out of this. So it's the like, hold up, like give it one more second, maybe I could get a little bit closer. And I think I missed like 4 or 5 shots of it, turning and looking away, but then it made me enjoy getting one where it is kind of looking more at me of like, yes, nailed it. I know Effie and I would, especially like when we were first kind of going out shooting film freediving, we were going out and like with all the sardines when they were out at Monastery, and we both were like, oh, like we nailed it. And then like develop it and like everything of mine was underexposed or had like scratches running through it. So to finally get something to like develop properly and come out with something, you were just like, yes, so much more. You really were happy about it. And then this one was it's actually one thing I really liked about film too, is I feel like it's a lot better with highlight detail of it kind of naturally glows versus I feel like if I shoot digitally, the highlights seem much more harsh. You'll see more of a fall off of where it goes from like no information to information, whereas this is much more gradual. So this was actually, it was an accidental shot. I had been shooting underneath kelp and then went out outside the kelp and didn't think to stop back down, but it was kind of one of those lucky happenstances that I still had enough information in the highlights that was able to pull information back in off of the backlit kelp blades. And yeah, here you go.
I'm gonna stand. Oh, okay. So I work in the darkroom, and that's the main reason I remain with film. Like I really like the darkroom process. And I got my Nikonos 5 in 1988. And it's probably not the same one because I think I've flooded a few. And I love the 15 millimeter. That just, I see everybody else has one. Yeah, steady. Okay. So this is a process, alternative photographic process called lith printing. And I use copper bleach in the dark room, and it's complicated, but I have a special developer that brings in tones and weird green and contrast. So this is from a series that I'm doing that has to do with the evolution of the Earth and the way that we all came from the ocean, and how we've evolved to land. And I'm trying to kind of get the primordial look in the images. So this is a print. They're all unique. Everyone looks different in this process. The same process, and I kind of like the way that this felt like we were falling from the womb of Mother Ocean in this picture. Next one. same process, different paper. So we're getting into the primordial feeling here. The other thing I do is use toners and kind of look for the really unique looking prints. So this is what I was doing about 20 years ago, and I was using brown toner, and it's just a more standard print and image in it. And I was very attracted to the bottom of the ocean and photographing the bottom and what it looks like, because there's not a lot of that in underwater photography. You see a lot of fish, but what else is there? And so I got into the bottom, and especially sand. Okay. And also abstracts and, playing with light. So I really recommend, if you're interested in film, in taking darkroom class up at MPC or wherever you are, and learning that process, just to take advantage of the film rather than just scanning it. You can do a lot with it in the darkroom, or there's all these hybrid things now where you can use film to make cyanotypes or platinum prints, so I think that's the advantage of film. And I don't do any digital, so it is possible. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.
This one doesn't work. Okay. This is a series that's called Conchi. And these are platinum palladium prints. And we started the project in 06, and it went to about 2014. And then I was doing this with another diver photographer, but she decided that anyway, she wasn't going to be able to make a living in the arts, so she went back to school. She's a CPA now, so. But it was a fun collaboration. The first prints we did were actually just traditional black and white silver prints. This is all darkroom work, by the way, and that just didn't look right. So we tried a couple other techniques. I tried split toning the prints, which gave them a nice color, but it still didn't have a very good feel to it. So we finally decided that maybe it was be fun to leave the brush strokes from the platinum printing on it. So that's what all this work is here. And it's all done. Everything was done on film, and everything's done in the darkroom. The negative has to be the same size as the print. Prints are about 11 by 14. So the first negatives we made, or I made, since I was a tech on this, were done analog using copy film. And then when copy film disappeared, we had to switch to digital negatives, but which was great, actually, because it gave us a lot more control over the final print. Jellyfish floating over the sand. Part of the whole process was that we wanted the grain. So that's what the film was all about. And this film, the last film I was using was the T-Max 400. And I've been processing film in a developer called D23 for over 40 years. And I probably put several thousand sheets of 4x5 film through it. And it's a really versatile developer. It contains only metol and sodium sulfite. And you can process film in there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, which is what I've done that before. And in a process called total development, where every piece of silver halide in the film is processed completely. And it gives you a very contrasty negative. And because it's mainly sodium sulfite, it doesn't fall. So you can just leave it in there, I had a teacher, Oliver Galliani. He used to leave it in there for 24 hours, his 8x10 sheets. He put it in a nitrogen burst tank, and then go to bed, come back in the morning and finish his processing. This was a turtle in Hawaii. This was right out here in the breakwater. One day there were these rays out there and some mackerel dancing in the light. I think that's it, right? Okay, yeah. But anyway, same cameras. This one has a N90S in it and with a 20mm lens. And Chuck was nice enough to come over one day because the I don't know, the autofocusing on these old cameras is really sluggish and slow. So he helped me set it up so it manually focuses here. I can just, put it to whatever distance I think the subject's at. I bet. Oh, and this is actually, I put that on there for doing some video. I thought it'd look good on the website, but it does terrible video. But it did sort of transition me into digital photography because I do like the stills that it.
First off, wow, what, hey, so I know the digital now, not much speed, take photos, make adjustments later, but the film needs the feature, or your so if you guys see each comment on how you evaluate the light, or
Go down the line here. There you go.
I've learned like what film can't shoot, I think. Like I've yeah. And so like I'm a lot more selective when I first was shooting. Like I would shoot everything and then get a rollback and be like nothing, like not a single shot. So I do have a light meter here. Joe and I think we've both moved from the Nikon 5s to the 3s because we've both flooded our 5s. And so the 5s have a built-in light meter, but once it floods, it's donezo. The 3s are all mechanical, so it can survive a flood in theory. So I have a light meter here. It's this little marine meter, and it goes between the Rolling Marine and my 3 now. So I'll like get a meter reading, but I kind of like I think I know now what the scene needs, and then I double check with Joe. Usually I'm like, I have like 1/125th, f5.6, what do you have? And then he confirms or denies whether that's right. Yeah.
See, I use light meters for my black and white photography. This camera here has a spot meter built into the viewfinder, which I use, and then I also if I use an Iconis, the 5 that has a meter, but also a lot of times it's just a gut. It's a gut thing, as Burke was. My mentor Ernie Brooks. He had a saying, and I don't know, maybe I think it was original, but he might have got it from somebody else, but it was F8, F8 at 1/25th and be there. That was kind of, and it worked for him. If you look in his book, Silver Seas, you look back at the guide in the back, most of those pictures are F8 at 1/25th, because that particular film shooting in temperate water, if you're at like an ISO 400, it kind of mid-tone, mid-water, it's kind of like that. But what I use a spot meter, and what I do is on a dive, I'll get down there and I look at the range of light. Same in a kelp forest. Maybe I'm down at Lobos and get down the bottom. I look up into the light and I'll look at the range of light. And usually I'll look into in the usable shadow areas, like down in the dark parts of a kelp where you want to have shadow detail. And then I'll look up on the usable highlights, not the sun, but next to the sun or in the highlight areas that you want to have detail in. And if that's within 5 stops, that's normal processing when I do my film. And if it's flatter than that, I can do by processing in my darkroom I have in my house, I can actually increase the contrast or I can decrease it just by the way I develop the film. The old axiom is expose for your shadows and develop for your highlights. And it's true 80 years ago, it's still true today. But I find that the black and white negative has a huge dynamic range to it. When T-Max came out in 1986, they did tech studies on it, and it was pulling like 20 stops, back in the 86. And that's a lot. So you do have a lot of range with a black and white negative. So basically I look at my shadows, look at my highlights, and then I'll put it in between. I use a system called the zone system. Anyone familiar with the zone system? It gets a lot of it's made, there's a lot of books out there in zone system. They try to make it really complicated, but in principle, it's very simple, especially when you're shooting roll film. Basically, on a roll film, you've got to process the whole roll at the same time. If you're shooting a 4x5, you can do individual sheets of film, or if you're brave, you can take your roll film and cut it in strips and do. I don't do that. So I just, you have to make some compromises. But I find with a zone system, you want to place your exposure in the mid-tone area. So look at my shadows. It might, on the kelp forest, it might be like down around 2.8 or 4, and then up at the top it might be 22. My top, so then I'll take my shadow exposure where the reading is, and I'll stop down a couple stops to the mid-tone area. Might be F5, 6, or 8, and that's my exposure. And then if I want to control the highlights in developing, I can reduce them if they're going to be too thick, or I can expand them. Pretty simple, actually. And that's what I use. And like I say, a lot of times I've shot out here so many thousand rolls of film, you kind of know on a sunny day what it is, but I check it anyway. So, so that's how I do it.
I don't do anything special. I rely on the meter that's in the camera, but because of the developer I'm using, it's really forgiving. So, and it works primarily in the shadows, and unless you really leave it in there for a while, it doesn't really bother the highlights. So, and of course, like Chuck, got thousands of rolls of film and sheets, and we sort of know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mostly f 5.6 at a 60th where I go, and doesn't really change that much. But I'm on automatic setting, and if I'm shooting up, I go to f16 or something. Don't worry too much, because with black and white film, like they said, it's pretty forgiving. And yeah, so I think I don't get too technical about it. What Chuck is saying is absolutely correct. And if you want to get into that, that's how you make a really good image, really good negative.
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, in fact, when I was first getting into it, I was always texting Chuck, like, Chuck, I have a question about how to. But the one other thing I would say is, I know there are times where if I say like at one shot that was like, oh, like that's if I don't care about the rest of the roll, as long as that one comes out properly, there definitely have been times where I'm realized like, oh, I kind of messed up, so I will kind of make a note of that and then say, as I'm developing it, push it or pull it a little bit just to make sure that one shot at least will be properly exposed, and then everything else might be slightly dark or slightly light, but at least I know like I'd get one keeper that I would be happy with. As someone who's limited, as someone where like my exposure to film like the development process to me is like I'm studying more of the development process. What are some like the knobs? Yeah.
So my question is, as someone with very limited film photography experience, is as you're going through the development process, what are some of the knobs that you're tweaking? What is that process actually like as you're going from your raw film to your final developed photo?
Okay. Well, so I would say if you're just getting started, I mean, the biggest thing you can do is use, I know online there's the massive deviation chart. It is a godsend. It has all types of films and then different types of developers. So you can look up specifically of like, what was I shooting? What ISO would I want to develop this at? And it'll tell you approximately like, well, how long would you expose that film for? And I know everyone kind of has a different way of developing their film. Some people like to agitate their film more when the cool back and forth to kind of help the development get on the film. Again, what I was mentioning of having questions for Chuck back in the day, that was like I saw his shots. I was like, Chuck, how did you come away with these gorgeous tones? And you're like, okay, well, I use D76, so that was the first developer I bought, and I've stuck with that ever since. So and then if I was realizing like saying like, oh, I want, say this one shot is a little bit dark, I want everything to be a little bit brighter, then I would just maybe push develop for a minute and a half more. But it's all kind of a guesswork, and you never really know until you see those final results of, oh God, it turned out okay.
I guess I won't talk about film. I'll talk about the print, because you want to get to a print eventually, unless you scan the negative, I guess. So the print, you're putting your negative through light onto a piece of paper, photo paper, and then you're taking that into a developer in a tray, and then you're taking that into a stop bath, and then finally the fixer, and then a wash, and that's it. It's really actually simple, and it doesn't change. It's not like computers. This process has not changed for years, so that's the good news. And anybody can do it. So my recommendation is like, keep it simple.
Are we still talking about processing film? Well, I mean, there's not really much to processing a roll of film. If it's 35 millimeter, you put it on a reel. We have any reels here? No. And then you put it in a stainless steel tank. You throw a developer in it. Okay. Agitate it, process it for whatever amount of time, could be anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes or whatever. And then I just use water. Once I dump that out, I use some water, agitate it to get rid of the developer, and then I put in the fixer. And the fixer does exactly that. It fixes the image on the film. And then you have to give it a wash. Hang it up. Usually throw a wetting agent in it so that the water doesn't beat up on the film. And then when it's dry, you can start working with it. Put it in the enlarger, put it on a scanner. Depends on what you want to do with it. Yeah, mine would go on a scanner. And then I would go from there, make a large negative, then take that large negative into the darkroom, coat my paper, and then print. But it's up. Huh?
Starting to shoot film, I think you should eliminate the areas where you can make mistakes. So like when I first started shooting film, I sent my black and white film out to a lab because like I need to know if something went wrong that happened when I was shooting it and not when I was developing it. And sometimes I would get a rollback and I'd be like, I don't know if I messed up in the developing process or if I overexposed this in the ocean or things. So like when you're learning to shoot, I think like pass that off to people who are like more experienced. And I don't develop my own color film because that's a little more technical. And then when you're comfortable with shooting and you're like kind of know what you're getting, then I think you can step in and start to take over developing your own film at home. And it's not really hard to develop film. You don't need a dark room or anything. You just need like a room to like that's dark to load it in. And then you can do the developing process in tanks, in light and stuff. So yeah.
I mean, I would find somebody that does it, and spend an hour with them in a dark room, and you're there. You'll know exactly what to do. It's not a complicated process.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question though, because sometimes the film development aspect of it is sometimes thought of as kind of non-creative. It's more chemical when you go through the steps, and that's true. But I found that also there's a lot of creativity that can go into the way you process your film. And I used D76 developer. That was a developer that was invented in the 1920s to develop black and white motion picture film for the silent movies. That's how old it is. And it's been a standard for developers to this day. And it has two developing agents, this hydroquinone and metol. And as time went on, Kodak replaced metol with a better alternative called phenidone that it has a longer shelf life, and it's a little kinder to people that put their hands on the developer for people who get rashes and stuff. I don't recommend putting your hands on it, but just wear latex gloves. But anyway, when I'm done with my dives, I go into my darkroom here if I'm working locally, and I'll offload the film. Again, you just need a dark room. You could do it in your bathroom at home if you don't have a dark room. And I take a little bottle cap for 35 millimeter film, take a bottle cap, pop the top off in the dark, load it onto a stainless steel reel. That's the type, as Ryuijie mentioned, that I use. They make them in plastic too, which are easier, the spring-loaded ones, but I like the stainless steel ones. And then you go through, basically through testing, you're going to find out what your development times are. And I was very fortunate when I went to Brooks Institute. Ernest Brooks was a mentor of mine. He basically gave me his T-Max development test and just said, here, this is what I came up with. So I was very fortunate, and I kind of used his as a baseline using T-Max 100 back in many, many years ago. And then I switched to 400, and it was an easy adjustment. And basically, what I'll do is, again, as I mentioned earlier, on a particular dive, I will have remembered what the range of light was when I shot it, whether I want to increase the development to bring the highlights a little denser, or if I want to restrain the development to ease off on the contrast. And basically, my kind of normal development time is like 13, 12 minutes actually. And that's actually given it a little bit of an extra plus, what they call plus development. There's plus development and minus development. And plus development, you're trying to get more density in your highlights. And a negative, don't you want to restrain it a little bit, flatten it out a little bit. But it's actually pretty simple. And after you do a few rolls, it really is. It's a simple thing, but it sounds complicated. But I'm just trying to encourage you to don't be afraid of it. And I stuck with that developer for years. And I used to use T-Max makes a developer. There's lots of developers out there. And I like D76. Get a little extra edge to the grain. I kind of like to have a little organic feel to the negative, and when I push the film, which I always do, it gives you that kind of a tri-X kind of, you familiar with tri-X? It gives you a little bit of a feel. I like the look of it, but there's lots of developers, but that's how I do it. So. Sage, I mean, leeway in terms of exposure.
I don't think we're going to. So Sage was asking. So in digital and Lightroom, which is, darkroom, Lightroom, we have a lot of leeway with working with images in terms of masking and fixing different things. What do you guys do in the darkroom that's similar to what digital photographers do in the Lightroom?
You want to go down? You want to start on that and work down here? Okay.
I just choose negatives that don't need a lot of work. And when I'm shooting now, I know I'm that's some chunky water over there, and I'm gonna avoid that because I don't have backscatter removal, I know that there are processes for bleaching things out, which we tried to do once with that photo of Joe's with the bull kelp, and Chuck showed us how to do it. So that's crazy. You have to hand spot every little thing with bleach and a paintbrush and everything. And it's really fun. Yeah, I don't have much control over it.
I find when I process the roll of film, and when you bring the film out of the final wash, and it's just like, I'm like a little kid at Christmas because, wow, and it's been like that since I started shooting when I was 14 years old or doing darkroom work, and the magic hasn't left me. I'm still, every time I open up the lid, it's always a thrill. But anyway, I look at once the negative is dry, and I'd recommend putting a little photo flow in your wash to let it take, depending on what your water quality is where you live, a few drops of photo flow in like a 16-ounce stainless can and give it some agitation. It really it'll dry. And also use distilled water when you do your final rinse. Because sometimes people, when they start getting into this, they'll say, geez, I got spots all over my negative. Well, it's because the tap water in your city may have minerals. So when you do the final rinse, I would use distilled water before you hang it up, and put some drops of photo flow in. It really helps a lot. They'll be squeaky clean. But anyway, I look at the negative when it's dry, and then I'll cut them in strips 36. If it's 35 millimeter, if it's 120, it'll be bigger strips. But anyway, you kind of look at that on a light table, and then I'll make a proof sheet in the darkroom before I actually make prints. And you kind of take a look at where, what the image is going to, and usually a proof sheet, I kind of make it flat. I want to see all the information in there and see where the highlights are, when the shadows are. And from there, I'll select an image that I think I want to print, and then you put it in the enlarger, and basically you kind of run a little test strip on the paper, going down, and you kind of experience will teach you. After you do this for a while, you kind of have a kind of a ballpark figure where the base exposure is, but you just expose the paper and then take a black card and go all the way down. It might be, 5 seconds, 10, 15, 20, all the way down, and then process it. And the first time you do it, well, it might be a little dark, a little light. You do another one, and finally you get where your basic exposure is. And then you look at the highlights, and you figure out what it takes to burn. You might have to burn in some of the dense areas where the highlights are. You may have to burn it in. And so you do a base exposure, and then come back in and then burn in the highlights. And what I like to do is I do split printing. So when you can use a dichroic color enlarger where you have the most all of us, I think, are printing on variable contrast paper. Is that true? Yeah, the variable contrast paper, it's sensitive to blue and green light, and it's kind of cool because one has more contrast and one is a little flatter, and it allows you to do split printing. So you can give a basic exposure. And then if you've got a big burn area that you want to do, you don't want to have it really contrasty because you'll start to see the burn. You can dial the filtration back and soften it out a little bit, and it'll really smooth out the burn. And sometimes the burns might be 20 seconds or 30, depends on the negative. And then you might do a third or fourth exposure. I've done prints where I've had 5 exposures, and I might change the filtration every time. So you kind of work in that negative, and you kind of dance around it, but you lay down the basic mid-tone areas, and then you kind of finesse the highlights. And sometimes when you first print, you may have a problematic shadow where you hold the light out with a dodging tool, and you hold out the light. It's called dodging. And it's really kind of a little dance that you're doing around the enlarger. And it sounds crazy, but actually it's pretty simple to do once you do it. So that's how that's my process.
Anyway, it can be simple. I mean, it can be simple or it can be as complicated as you want. I back in the late 70s, when I was really, really involved in landscape photography, I took a 2-week workshop in Virginia City with a photographer named Oliver Galliani. I spent 2 weeks calibrating film, learning how to use a densitometer and how it related to paper and all that. So it can get complicated. I think it was about 6 months before it finally sunk in and I knew what I was doing with it. So, but anyway, to answer your question, you're talking about working with a computer and because when I'm making a negative to make a platinum print, okay, the numbers have to be specific because platinum is a weird material. It has a D max, and if you exceed that, the print solarizes. So the negative has to be exact to print on it so that the whites print and the shadows print without the print turning over and solarizing. So I use the curve. Once I think I have an image that looks good, I take the curve and I read it. I read the highlights, I read the shadows, I read all the midtones. Okay, and then I make adjustments using other sliders, right? And then I come back and I recheck it before I finally do an output of the film. So that when I go in the darkroom, I know that my usual time for a printing one is about 3 minutes, 15 seconds. So, and it usually works out perfectly. But I do use those tools. So I'm using kind of a hybrid process, traditional photography, some digital, and back to traditional again.
I'm just going to simplify it. So basically, you can control the contrast with the type of light you're projecting in the enlarger. You can also dodge and burn with light, but you can't get really precise like you can on the computer. And then you can use certain toners to bring out more contrast or darkness. And then after it's dry, you can spot with a paintbrush. So that's how you do spotting. It's fun.
I will say when printing with film, it makes me really miss the backscatter exterminator. Doing all those printing little ... But I will say what's also fun is if you're doing it, say, digitally first after scanning it, for me, it's fun to be able to get an idea of how much contrast I would want to do it in a print. So it kind of gives me an idea of like, okay, well, if I would use, say, like a variable contrast 4, it's going to punch it a little bit. That would be approximately doing this on the computer. And also I feel like if I'm shooting digitally, yeah, I'm going to focus much more so on the highlights versus I'm more worried of the shadows when shooting on film, because if you lose your shadows, then like there's no way you're going to recover that. But the highlights, you can get a lot more information back. And honestly, there's like, as Robin was saying, of different ways to print too. I mean, there's a lot of fun different things that I feel like you can't do digitally. Like we're in a group and we have someone who does pastel coloring of their black and white prints. So theoretically, you could make a black and white print anything, which I feel like, be kind of a bit crazier to do digitally. So there's different ways to have fun with it, or even like toning with tea or coffee. So yeah, a lot of fun different ways to explore and have fun with it.
But on analog printing in the darkroom, there's a chemical called Farmer's Reducer that Kodak makes. It's a bleach and for localized. So if you get a little spot that came out on your print, like a dark speck that you didn't see when you were diving, but it ends up on your negative, you can take like a 4-aught brush, really fine brush, and wear a magnifying glass. And when the prints, you just squeegee off the print and you take it and you actually just put it on, and it'll slowly dissolve that black spot. And if you're really good at it, you can match the background. But most of the time when I do it, it goes a little lighter, and then later you just spot it in with some spot toner. And it's an archival product. It works great, but it takes a lot longer than, you know.
I have a couple questions from online, from people out in the rest of the world. I see Martine's on there as well, all the way from Maldives. So, a couple of questions. First one is there a universal developing guide for different developers for a black and white film?
A universal what? Guide?
Is there a universal developing guide for different developers for a black and white film?
Okay. Here, Chuck.
Well, I saw it in a book by Steve Anshel that on black and white. You can probably find it on Amazon. There is a universal huge chart. I mean, Joe referenced it earlier. It's amazing. Every film, every developer, and it's got guides there for times and whatnot, and ratios of what ratio you're gonna dilute your developer. So an answer to the question, yes, there is.
There's also an app for it that I use called like Mass Dev, and you just like you put in the film stock that you used, and then you put in the ISO that it was at. So if I shoot T-Max 400, I push it to 800 usually, and then it will give you a timer for like how long you agitate with the developer. It'll give you how long you let it rest, the rinse, and all of that. So Mass Dev is like a really good app too.
Okay. Yeah, another one here. I think this one I can probably better answer. It says, does Nauticam make a housing for my Kodak Instamatic, and can we change flash cubes underwater to get more than 4 shots? Currently, no, they don't make a housing for Kodak Instamatic. If money's no object, I'm sure somebody could make something. And changing flash cubes underwater, that would be a very big technical challenge, trying to get that mechanism to spin around and everything. So I'm going to say most likely not. And the next one, what would you recommend for someone just starting out with film photography? What camera to purchase for film? What settings to start shooting?
Well, I'm not sure. I would suggest an Iconis if you're starting out with film. They're available online. They're not very expensive, and they're very easy to use. Is that?
I've heard that you want the orange ones because the green ones have cooties.
I will say too, is if you do buy a used one, make sure to get it serviced, because the O-rings internally, especially if they've been sitting for 20, 30 years, I know from experience, they can flood. In fact, mine was one of the internal O-rings that just went bad. So it's nothing you would have ever seen. You couldn't check it. But that with the 15, like we all have, it's easy to easier to initially focus. I feel like get better depth of field. And then I think Chuck, you mentioned it of just f8 1/125th, ISO 400 to 800, kind of depending on if it's cold water or warm water. I think that's a good starting point.
So
I was wondering if you could put a little, tap a little straighter valve.
So you can get the Nikonus 5 with the 35mm lens, and that works on land. It focuses on land. The other lenses don't. So that's a really great lens to practice with on land before you go underwater with it, and just to get to know that camera.
That's a good idea. What's that?
If you would repeat why, the question is, why do you choose them?
Oh, okay. Well, complete disclosure, I don't anymore. I moved away from it, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, something like that. This is what got me started with it. I said, oh, wow, look at that. This little thing, I'm making 30-inch prints with it, so I said, okay. So anyway, that's my reason.
Yeah, I guess I've never left film. I'm a dinosaur, so and because I love the darkroom, I stayed there, right? And I've also learned from really great mentors, and I feel like that's a super valuable skill that I can pass on. And the young people today aren't starting out like I did, and there's a reason to stay with it.
I have a couple reasons why I switched over. One was I was finding I've been shooting digitally for it's like 10 or 15 years, and I found out I was starting to feel like the dives were just like, oh, I have to find something cool, or otherwise I'm not coming away with something interesting. And it was always go, 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 and just kind of hold the trigger down and spray and pray in a sense. Even if you are thinking like, oh, I'm going to take my time, it just, there was a lot of then having to cull through all these images. And so when I started getting into film, it really slowed me down quite a bit to just take my time, focus in on the whole scene, not just even your subject, but what's happening behind the subject. So I really enjoyed that. And then aside from that, Effie and I were doing a lot of freediving, and having a larger rig at some point was just getting kind of cumbersome and annoying, getting snagged on kelp all the time. So having the tiny little Nikonus just like on my hip made it so much easier getting in and out of the water, not worrying about having to carry it, and just, I got enough of a workout in the water that it just made things easy.
Well, I got my first Nikonus camera when I was 14 years old, and I was fortunate to have a darkroom in our high school and a great art teacher. And I knew right then I wanted to make my life as an underwater photographer. That was it. Actually, I knew when I was 11 years old watching Jacques Cousteau. But I started out in the darkroom shooting black and white tri-X, and I love the process. It's the process. I just love it. All the black and white stuff I do now, it's personal. It's just I do it. No one's paying me to do it. I've done a lot of assignment work, and they always want a color. And when I was really active, it was Kodachrome days, but color was what they wanted. And then when I was in Brooks Institute, I was a motion picture major, so I was shooting movies. And I came all around Robin Hood's barn as I got a little older. I said, I really need to get back to my roots. And Ansel Adams had in his autobiography, talked about assignments from within and assignments from without. And the without were the assignments that paid the bills and kept the mortgage paid and all that. You got to do those. But most of Ansel's really famous work were assignments from within that he did between assignments that he's really famous for. And I started to realize, I guess it was in my 40s when I started. I thought I was old then. Well, man, I'm getting old. I better start doing more personal work, you know. Yeah, fast forward. So I find I love the process. I go into my dark room and put on my Miles Davis CD, and there's no time in there, just a great gray lab clock, and I'll spend hours. I just love it. And if you don't enjoy the process, well, then don't do it. But I find that whether it's processing film or printing, it's a labor of love. And again, it's personal work. No one pays me to go out and do this stuff. But I guess to use a musical connotation or an artist thing. I mean, some people, I guess they play the piano or they play the cello. They're attracted to strings. I'm a brass player. I mean, you find your voice, the kind of thing you feel like you can express the inner feelings. So this stuff is all about feelings and emotions, the personal stuff. And I find that this type of work is the best way for me to do that.
Yeah, there was a practicality for me, like in the beginning. One was like I could get an Iconos 5 with a really nice lens for like maybe $500. And I knew that they were good enough because that's what everybody shot with for decades, you know? And I didn't have to get like a housing that was thousands of dollars. So I shot film for 4 years before I felt like I earned like a digital housing. And yeah, as a free diver, it's like I'm really hydrodynamic down there. But there's like a feel and a mood to film that I haven't been able to like capture with digital, and it puts me in a different frame of mind when I'm diving in the kelp forest. I'm a lot slower. I'm a lot more intentional. Like there are so many times on a dive where I'll compose a shot and then I'll just be like, no, that's not the one, and move on. Which, digital, you're just like, yeah, I'm just like gonna shoot away. And then like you spend time looking at the back of your camera and things. And I've like been thinking about this more with like AI and like stuff like, oh, AI and photos and things. And I feel like film photography, there's like an opportunity for me to put like a personal touch at so many points that's like only my personal like perspective and things. Like I loaded the film stock that I'm choosing, what to shoot, how I develop it and everything. It's like those are only decisions that I can make. So it just feels a lot more personal to me, and like no one could recreate that. So.
Question in the back.
Do we use
The question was, do we use strobes or video lights?
I tried, and then I discovered what backscatter was. So I haven't really tried again with film. I know Chuck did a lot with like slide film and stuff, right? With strobes.
Yeah, when I was younger on assignment work, we used a lot of electronic flash or movie lights, constant light source. But for my personal work, I don't use any. I use the zone system I talked about earlier. So when you're using a strobe or fill light, you're getting shadow detail. Well, I can get it in my exposure and in my processing. And that's something I learned from Ernie Brooks. I had a great mentor. So I rarely use strobes unless it's a night dive or really, really dark. I like to bring like a constant light source, like a movie light, but I rarely use artificial lights, mostly available light, and then zone system. I have, but yeah, but then you need some artificial. Less your practical light sources are there, People go, why did you ban them? Somebody put HMI lights on top of the water, then you can use that source, I've done that.
No, I'm just using ambient light for all my photography, and even though the digital comes out colored, it's going to go to black and white anyway. So, I don't really worry about color correction and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, when I was doing color slide film in the 80s and the 90s, I was using a strobe. And then when I switched to black and white, you don't really need one.
I was from time to time using one until my Nikonos 5 flooded. And then with the 3, it was like you have to use a whole different strobe setup. So now I don't, but maybe if I get another Nikonos 5. And even then, it would only be really if I was doing like macro work with the extension tubes, then I would bring them out. But for wide angle stuff, it would all just be ambient.
So again, while our meetings are currently open to everyone to compete in the monthly competitions, you do need to be a member of NCUPS. And being a member is not expensive, and it supports everything that we do here and supports the much loved Monterey shootout. So I encourage you guys to please join NCUPS. You can scan the QR code right here. You can go to the website. You can join as a family if you and your loved ones dive together. And we are going to be doing meetings here the second Friday of every month. And we're going to have some awesome speakers throughout the year. And I'm really excited. And, tell your friends, bring your friends. Again, they don't have to be members to come. But you're going to get more out of it. And we're all going to get more out of it the more members we have. So please join. And one of the cool things about being a member is you get to compete in the monthly competitions. And we announce the themes for these competitions at the beginning of the year. So this is this year's themes here. And so you'll see for every month except for December, we have a theme. And these are up to some amount of interpretation, sure. And you'll notice it's January now, but we are going to be doing January and February together. So next meeting, we will announce the winner for January and February because we're making a couple of changes that we wanted to let you all know about. So these are all on the website. So take pictures of this, but they're all on the website too. So, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. But they're all pretty straightforward. The kind of the cool one, November, is the one I'm looking forward to, creative lighting. So that's kind of like get weird with it, have fun, do anything that's not up there, have fun. But some things that we are changing. So we're doing two categories now. We really want to encourage video shooters. And I know that a lot of folks are shooting video. And so we want everybody to submit photos and videos to the mini comp. And you can, there's instructions on how to submit online. It just gets uploaded through SmugMug. All of them are there now. You can go ahead and submit for December now if you feel like you've nailed December and are never going to take a more creative photo for the rest of the year. You can go ahead and submit now, but you can also submit videos. And this year, we're going to have a photographer of the year and a videographer of the year. So there'll be a winner in each of those realms every month. And then the other thing we're changing, instead of voting, which is super fun, but there's not a lot of feedback involved, we're going to have guest judges. So that the winners are going to get really meaningful feedback on their images. And it's going to be from, pro shooters. We happen to have access to a lot of those folks. So we're going to have a lot of cool people checking out your images. And so that's another really, really good reason to join and to submit to the contests. And because of that, we need your images earlier than we have in the past. So we're going to ask for your images by the 15th of the month prior. So for February and January, we want them by the 15th of this month. So get hot. Get on it. And then for March, we want them by February 15th and so on. And that gives the judges time to, have thoughtful consideration and feedback. So get them in that time so that the judges have time to do that. So those are really the big changes. All of the rules are up there. If you have questions, let us know. Really similar to the Monterey shootout for those of you who have participated. So like when it comes to AI, no generative AI and things like that. But all of those rules are up there. And again, if you have questions, just let us know. So on to the 2025 Photographer of the Year, Bruce Sedgwicks. Nicely done. And how this, for those of you who don't know, how the photographer of the year is it's not chosen, it's earned. It's through each monthly competition. You accrue points for wins, and the person who has the most number of points at the end of the year is the photographer of the year. And in 2026, we will have a photographer and a videographer of the year. So join and compete. And then we also are going to be doing a photo of the year, and this comes from all of the winning images throughout last year. And this we are going to vote on. So if you guys want to whip out those smartphones and scan this, and those of you on Zoom can do the same. You can vote for one. Please only vote once. Vote for an image, and I'll give everybody a couple of minutes. Then we'll see who the winner is. All right, if you voted, raise your hand. All right, nailed it. So this is a little I know. All right. Oh, there is a clear winner here, you guys. Photo number 11. We are going to go back to this. Yes. Mackenzie, our outgoing president, wins photo of the year. That is a beautiful shot, Mackenzie. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the shot?
So this shot was from a few years ago, in the early days of COVID, where we could not really be among people except in outdoor spaces. So me and one of my dive buddies and his then girlfriend were out doing some tide pooling. I guess it was probably right about this time of year. And I was playing around with the anemones, and I'm like, oh, this looks really great. And then I saw my dive buddies getting a little bit closer. I'm like, you know what? That could be a pretty nice shot. And fortunately, they moved right into frame without me even needing to tell them to do it. And I was like, man, that is a phenomenal setup right there. And then they eventually got engaged and got married. So as their wedding present, I printed this out, and they have it hanging on their wall now. So, yes, that was with a strobe. So. And this is like the only time I've ever done tide pooling, so I got very lucky and was really trying to figure things out. So, including lighting, which was a fun one to figure out. So.
Nicely done, Mackenzie, and by a landslide. I love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, all of you guys, for being here. Again, sign up. You'll get the newsletter. You'll get info on who's going to be speaking and all of our events. And for those of you diving tomorrow, I'm fingers crossed for really nice conditions and excellent diving. Thanks for being here.